Hey everyone, how are you doing? Hope you are doing good. Once again, welcome to another short session on multi-tier clean architecture in .NET. Now, many of you ask that what is the right way of creating multi-tier projects in .NET? Do we need to create just 3 layer or 4 layer or how many layers? Now, there is no such rule that how many layers you might create or you might want to do, but usually you should be going for 7 layers. Now, let me explain all of them. I already have let me close this now. Okay, so I already have a PDF prepared for you, which states that the very first thing we should do is creation of the model projects. Okay, now first of all, let me quickly get you through all those 7 projects that you should do. Now, every one of them are projects. So that means underneath the Visual Studio, you have to be creating 7 projects. We start with the models. The models are the basic building blocks of your application. This is the first thing that are decided. Then we come to interface projects, which contains all kinds of interface rules, the requirements, the business requirements. It comes in under the interface. Next, we have all the data access layer class, which is the DAL. Now, DAL can be implemented in any way you want. The DAL can be implemented using your usual ADO.NET, or maybe you can implement DAL with Entity Framework, kind of ORM logics and all. Okay, ORM technologies. The fourth thing that comes is repository implementation project. Now, what is this? From here, the application turns towards the actual business. Here we actually start creating the repositories, and these repositories ultimately connect back to your application data layer. Don't worry, I'll just go through them one more time. I'm just trying to tell you the layers and then I'll go over to them one by one in some details. So this is the repository layer, which actually connects back to the app DB context or the DAL layer. Now, the next thing is a service layer. The service layer will in turn connect to your repository system, and the service layer is what implements the core business logic of your application. And the sixth layer is the API project. So those who are so much interested in creation of APIs should know it comes in the sixth position. Okay, so for those who are just creating the API projects, they are just backend developers. Your development ends here because once the APIs are developed, your development ends. This API will connect to your service layer. And finally, if you want to create some client application, any kind of client projects, let's say a Blazor application or an MVC application or web app or a Windows app or a mobile app, in that case, you need to be consuming your API using something like HTTP client and things of that nature. Okay, so these are the 7 layers, sometimes known as onion layer, because you have the layers in onion. You can peel up the layer from the top one by one, right? So the same, in the very same way, we start from the layer 1 and we go progressively towards layer 7. Okay, that is where the application quite ends. Now that we have briefly discussed it, now let me come over again. Now, what are models? The very first thing your application developer will think of, that what are we dealing with? Let's say that you are dealing with a school management system. All right. So that means a school will naturally have students, teachers, probably subjects, right? So these are the domains. You can say that what are we dealing with? So the very first thing that comes to our mind when we are about to start an application is with which we are working. What are our domains? And therefore, we create the domain classes. In this example, we have a book class now. I'm not just taking them into Visual Studio for this particular demonstration. Just wanting to explain you. This is a short session, as I've told you. So I'm not going in depth because otherwise creating them, implementing them will take long time. We will eventually do them definitely, but for now, let us concentrate on the fundamentals and understanding the basics. Excuse me. So you see that public class book, this is something the domain class, okay? Like here we are dealing with some kind of library management system. Think about it, like libraries have books and members and all. So the first thing first, we have got a book class, and the book class is having something like ID, title, and whether the book is available or not. In our example, we just have one such model class, but however, in your application, you can pretty much have 20, 25, or even more such domain classes, okay? Often known as model classes as well. Now, there are some distinctions between domain, model, POCO classes, DTO classes, view models, and models. I will create a separate video on that, that how these seemingly confusing terms are actually have some similarities, but there are some differences also, right? So once again, that we can say POCO classes, like POCO, POCO, as it is written here, so I'll explain that in some other class. But for now, you understand this is the simplest form of class that can be used without the knowledge of any application architecture or data storage. Okay, so they are something that you can that knows nothing about the architecture, about the data storage capability or anything. You can simply use them anywhere. Okay, so POCO classes stands for plain old CLR objects. For those who are doing Java, whatever I'm describing holds the same, just that they call POJO classes, plain old Java objects. We call plain old CLR objects. CLR stands for Common Language Runtime, as in .NET, you might know that. So these are very simple classes. They can be oftentimes connected uh, to your entities as well. Okay. So basically, we are creating our domain layer. We want to be getting all our domain classes ready first. The first thing first. Okay. Like let's say you are about to cook something. All right. For those who love cooking, right? So what do? You just first prepare your you know just those mixtures, and you chop up some potatoes, right? So that means you do the basic preparation first, right? You can't just get it into the oven just right away. You need to do some preparation initially. The same thing, the model classes are the basic preparation of your project. We first have those model classes, POCO classes, whatever you call it. You can you just like to call it, you can. They are the domains of your application. They are the lifeblood of your application. The next thing is all the interfaces. Now, what are really interfaces? Interfaces are rules. Interfaces are rules. That is, that we don't directly create classes. Before we create classes, we just dictate the methods that will be there in your classes. So interfaces, you can say interfaces are shape of a class. So we don't say that, okay, I'm just going to start writing my class right away. We first write our interfaces, to make sure that we know what we are doing first. They are the rules. Interfaces are quite like rules. Okay. So we specify those rules that, okay, in our application, we would like to get all the books. We like to add some book. We like to get all my books. We like to get book by a certain ID. So these are the rules, these are the requirements of your business. So pretty much interfaces describe your business needs, right? So it's very important that we must decide on that. So first we decided on our domain classes, right? And this is very simple, because if you are just going for a project, you should know that what you are dealing with. If you are dealing with a hospital management system, the domains will naturally be patient, doctor, medicine, appointment, right? All these kind of things that will be dealt with in hospital management system. For something like like school, I told you, teacher, student, right? Or something like employee management system, you have employee, payroll, right? All these kind of projects, right? All these kind of things. So those which ultimately find its way as a database table. You can think these guys will ultimately find, not all of them, by the way, not all domain classes find their way in database tables. I repeat, not all domain classes are mapped one-to-one with the database table, but most of them are. Okay, so when we say domain classes, they are basically the logics of your application. It follows the architectural pattern, and we the domain driven pattern, the DDD pattern. So what it dictates is that you create your domains, and some of those domain classes will find a mapping one and on with the database table, right? There's a misconception that all domain classes will find its way to a database table. Not all right? So they describe your application requirement. It doesn't matter whether these domain classes will or will not have a corresponding database table, right? Hope you're getting the point. And the next thing is application requirement. So once these two things are done, a good amount of your application requirement and the backend objects are already done. Well, I mean, those domain class objects are done. The next thing comes is actually creating the resource of your application. Here is where the core application resource class gets created. Resource means whom I will contact for getting my data. So data access layer is the one which will serve your application data, right? So that DAL layer, data access layer, is the layer which will serve your application its necessary data, all data. DAL doesn't look at which data you might need or you might not need. DAL is a direct connectivity with the data source. Please understand, you might have some tables, let's say 5 tables, okay? And there are a lot of ways to generate data out of those 5 tables. You can do joining in 2 table, 3 table. You can do a lot of permutations and combinations to get data from your database tables. Now, what we do is that we create the basic structure connecting with each of those tables as an entity framework. You can see that for entity framework, the DAL is nothing but a class which inherits from the DB context class. This is central to entity framework. All right, so entity framework is here for a long time. Initially, it started with the concept of D-link, database link, for those who have been coming with .NET for quite a long time. They know that it started with all D-link, database link, and now progressively it went into entity framework. Now it supports a lot of databases. Initially it just supported SQL Server, right? Back in 2008, I'm talking almost like a lot of years back, like 16, 17 years back. Okay, so you can understand that this DB context is something that allows your class to connect with the backend tables. Yes. And here we map our domain classes. Okay. So the domain classes that we create are mapped here. All right. Optionally, we have some constructors and something which can be configured to know where your database connection strings are. Now, I'm not getting into details of it, just that this is something that is used to connect with the database, period. All right. We can go in two-way. Either we can go using this entity framework stuff or any ORM stuff, or we can go with the very basic ADO.NET. It's up to you. You can replace this with ADO.NET layer 2. You can use ADO.NET with Dapper technology, Dapper, which is very great. And I myself found, I must comment one thing, that entity framework is a little slower than the ADO.NET. I've seen it many times. I've compared, contrasted. What I've found is that ADO.NET is really, really fast because it's a direct connectivity with the database. This might be the reason why many companies still stick with ADO.NET. Maybe that you have to be writing a little bit more code, but the product of it, I mean, the solution is quite fast as compared with the entity framework. All right, and the next is repository. What are repositories? Repositories are the classes which implement your requirement. You remember that already in this second stage we have fabricated our requirements, that we need to get the books by ID, we need to be getting all the books, and maybe we also need to be adding some book, right? So this repository are the layers, are those classes which will implement your requirement, your data requirements. You might not need all the data, you might not need everything, but you might need something which is pertinent to your application, right? So that means which deals with your application. So that's the point we're trying to clarify, that these repositories are kind of a resource to your application. Your application is a kind of a wrapper over the DAL layer. There are many who actually directly write DAL codes within the repository. You can combine this DAL and repository, but that will cause the testing difficult. If you split your application in many layers, testing can be super simple. You can test any one of the layers. Okay, so the repository layer is something that will use under the hood this app.db context, that is the DAL layer, and will effortlessly transfer data in and out from the DAL layer. So this is the fourth layer, which basically has implemented your requirements, you remember. Now this layer will not do any kind of business validation. This layer is typically used for conversating with the DAL layer. It's a kind of conversation, right? Like let's say you call that, okay, get ID by async. This will delegate the call to context.books.find async. This context is something that it got from the DAL layer. It got it injected using the dependency injection, constructor injection. If you don't know what a dependency injection, what is dependency injection, I will create some exclusive video for it, or you might check out. I already made some as much as I remember. By the way, just forgot to tell you that I am a one-to-one trainer. So for those who are looking out for one-on-one classes in .NET, you can really feel free to give me a tinkle. Okay, so my description of my phone number and my website is given below. So all my descriptions are below. You can check with that, and you might consider giving me a tinkle. All right, so now, so that means this book repository is something this particular class will be implementing your requirement class, and under the hood it is going to be connecting with your app.db context, which is the DAL layer, and it will do all kinds of data stuff, but it does not do any kind of business logics. It don't have any kind of business logic. It doesn't validate thing, no validations. That is where the service layer comes in. And the service layer will use the capability of the repositories, right? So you can see how one layer is dependent on the previous layer. The service layer, excuse me. So the service layer is something that connects to our repository layer. So you can clearly see that this book repository was injected, right? So the book repository was injected, iBook repository. Now the service layer doesn't say that I will strongly connect to one class. I will strongly connect with book repository. It doesn't say like that. What it says is that give me any implementation of iBook repository. This is the core logic behind dependency injection, that you don't have to say that you require someone specific. You just give your requirement and you'll get someone who implements that particular interface. Okay, if that doesn't make good sense to you, don't worry, we'll come to them as and when required. So basically you can see this library service is requiring this iBook repository, which is something which has been created in the previous layer, and then It does simple tasks like issue book. Here is where business validation goes. Look at this. We first check that whether the book is there or not, and then we see if whether the book is available or not. So this kind of checks, this logical if else kind of things, those if else's will come in this service layer. So if you have some if else kind of thing, okay, if this, then issue the book, otherwise don't issue the book. This kind of if else's will come in, will pop in this service layer, right? So book is available, false, then don't return the book, otherwise return false. So this kind of logics will pop into this service layer. And finally, we have the actual API project. Now, this project's main role is not to do any business validation. It will, however, connect with your service. Okay, so as you can understand, this will require a library service. One of the classes that implemented it in our project, this is the class which implemented iLibrary service. So asking for iLibrary service will naturally provide you an object of library service class. Okay, so we asked for the iLibrary service, we injected in the constructor, put it in the field, and then anytime there is an API call, this is basically an API call, right? So this is an API call, this is an API, a standard API. As you can see, and APIs are all APIs in .NET Core. They inherit from controller base class, and additionally we also mark it as API controller to have some API controller benefits, some attributes, some API benefits into them. If you don't write this, it also works, by the way. Okay, you don't have to be writing this, it also works, but you don't get certain benefits. But you should definitely inherit from controller base class. All right, this is a base class. Even the normal MVC controllers ultimately inherit from controller base class. So that is to say, the usual controller class also inherits from the controller base class. I will keep a dedicated video for explaining them. Today I'm just explaining the architecture. So excuse me if you don't understand everything, that's fine, because we are dealing with the whole architecture as a whole. Okay, so here it goes, that HTTP post, we have this issue, which is how we are going to be calling this. This is the the relative path, and this is the post request. That means we need to be getting the data. I mean, the information will be coming inside the form body. Okay, and you can just look at it. The book is been issued with this ID information, and if for any reason the book could not be issued, then it says batch request book unavailable. It doesn't check, it just fires this command on the library service. If the library service returns a result, which is a boolean, if it is not true, we return a bad request, otherwise we return okay. Now what are these bad requests? Okay, they're the standard REST API requirements. We need to be returning some HTTP status codes. So when we return bad request, we actually return, the bad request code back to the client, right? If we are returning okay, that means we are returning a 200 okay, right? So in this way, we can really connect to our remote request coming from some client, and we can respond with some kind of information. And the last thing is the client itself. So if you're developing some project, like maybe kind of Blazor application, which is a great demand now these days, okay, the Blazor application, they are the nicest way to develop ASP.NET application these days. And you can also have the normal MVC application, which is nice. It's always been there. People learn it all the time. Or you can create a Windows project. All of them will and can connect with these APIs. And for that, they might need something like an HTTP client object. We can instantiate it in the client itself. Now, it may not be a .NET application at all. It can be just be anything. It can be a Java application. It can be a PHP application. All of these applications are having some way of creation of this HTTP client object. Okay, HTTP client, they do some kind of, they do have some kind of code to connect with the API, right? So you can check on to your um, coding environment, like let's say if you are going for the Java or JavaScript or jQuery, Python, Ruby, all of them are having some way to connect with APIs, right? So all of the applications these days are API aware, right? Hopefully you got some idea now that how exactly we can attain clean project. Let me tell you, we start our Visual Studio application with a blank solution first, and then progressively adding these projects. So one project for models only, one project for interfaces only, one project just to store the DAL layer, that is the data access layer, one project for repository, which is our requirement, which in turn requires that DAL layer to do the operations, the data operations. And the next is a service layer, which takes in commands from your API or maybe directly from a client application. You know, if you want, you might completely get away with this API if you are creating, you know, a client application, uh, I mean, non-connected client application. But whatever is the case, these service layers are always good because they hold the core business logic, right? And coordinates the repository calls. So this keeps the controllers clean, right? So they are the business logic layer. You can say you can either call it service layer, they call it business logic. I don't understand that not all applications are for business. So you can call it like application logic layer. Business means you are doing some monetary business. I don't know, this word business might mean the monetary business, but there are applications which does not do any monetary business. So you can call it as application logic layer. Okay, I prefer to call it application logic layer rather than business object logic layer. Okay, and the last is, of course, the API layer, which we really want to use all the time. I mean, not the last, but I mean, we can say the previous to the last. Okay, and the final one is the client or web application. I mean, this can be any kind of client. It can be Windows client, can be VB client, can be C Sharp client, can be Python client. They will ultimately connect with the with those API, right? So it's much important to come up to the sixth layer, and then you should be progressing towards your UI layer. So this is the final UI layer. Whether you are using Angular, whether you are using Blazor or React, they are in the seventh layer. Okay, so before you come here, you should be making sure that all your six layers are ready. Hopefully you got some idea. Hope I didn't confuse you. I know, like I have already talked about many such layers, but until and unless you do them, you do create them yourself, you won't get the actual idea. But I tried my best. Let me know if you have any doubt or not. If I really need to create another dedicated video for anything, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much. Please subscribe my channel in case if you want to get more such updates. And if you need some one-to-one .NET tutoring, feel free to give me a tinkle. I am always there to help you. Thank you so much.